Regarding your recent research paper on rethinking AI's impact and economic limits to job automation, you mentioned that only about 23% of jobs involving vision can be replaced by AI. Can you explain a bit more as to why it won't be economically viable to replace human labor completely?
Sure. So we should start by saying that if we think about all of the different tasks that humans do, right, and some of those tasks, right now we would say, oh, the AI systems that are being built, there's this possibility that they might be used to automate the human tasks. And so this is often called AI exposure. And so you might say, for example, well, if we look at the stuff that humans do with our vision, or we look at things in the real world, we might say computers are getting increasingly good at using vision to do things. And so we would ask, well, can computer vision replace humans doing those tasks? Okay, and so you get that. So there's this first bar which says, of all the things we do, this portion of them could potentially be done by these new AI systems. Whereas there are other things, for example, some of the state of robotics and stuff, some of the physical things we do, it would be a long time before we could imagine these systems being automated. But even within the things that AI can do already, we would say, well, okay, it's fine to say you could build an AI system that could do this task. But of course, the key question is, do you want to? Is it economically attractive to do that? And if it's incredibly expensive, it's much more expensive than using a human, you really wouldn't want to do that. And that's what our study explored. And what we found was that for 3/4 of the tasks where computer vision might be used, actually 3/4 of those tasks, you actually wouldn't want to use it. It would be more expensive than the human right now. Now, of course, that's just a snapshot of today. And what we should expect is that as these systems get cheaper and as we find ways to deploy them more broadly and so that the cost can be spread over more things, it should become more attractive. And so in paper, we talk a little bit about that process, and we should expect an increase. But what we see is that even with quite rapid increases in the improvement in costs and things like that, it would still take decades for these systems to ultimately replace a lot of the things that humans are doing with, in this case, vision.
Sunil, one thing I wanted to know, when you said jobs involving visions, what kind of jobs exactly were exceptional to your point? And in what kind of jobs the threat still remains?
Sure. So it's important to say that the distinction between what gets automated and what doesn't get automated isn't just at the task level, but it also depends on where you are. So let me give you a very concrete example of this. So one of the tasks that we looked at was if you're a retail supervisor, so you're like a manager at a Walmart or something like that, and one of the things you do is you walk around the store and you make sure that the prices that are on things are the correct price for that item. And so this is something that lots of folks can do. Now you can ask, well, should you automate that with vision system? And if you're Walmart, you certainly can imagine doing that, because you'd say, well, if we built such a system, we could use it across many, many different stores, many, many different products. That's something that has a lot of scope, and so there would be a lot of advantage to doing that. By contrast, if you think about a corner store where, again, you might have someone who would go around doing that, it's very hard to say that you should spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars building a system that actually is going to replace part of what the manager is doing anyway, where it really wouldn't be economically advantageous. And so those are the kind of distinctions that we see. There are also other things that you can say that make things more or less attractive. So one thing that makes it less attractive to build a system is if it needs very, very high accuracy. And that's because building AI systems gets much, much more expensive as you try and get these levels of performance that are very, very high. And so, building a system that is 70% accurate versus 90% accurate might cost you thousands of times more. So the reason that's important is that there are some tasks where you really want very good performance. And so one of the examples in our data is nurses. So nurses, one of the tasks that in particular a nurse anesthetist does is when you're under anesthesia, he or she will watch you and say, oh, are your eyes dilating? Are your cheeks the color? Are you in distress? Or are you doing okay under the anesthesia? That's, of course, something where we don't want the system to be just broadly accurate. We want it to be incredibly accurate. And that can make things more expensive as well.
So you mean acquiring soft skills will keep us more at a safer side than acquiring tech skills?
So I don't think we can have quite as broad a characterization as that. And in particular, the reason that one of the sort of really interesting things about generative AI is that it's able to do a bunch of things that we think of as soft skills, like changing the tone of expressing something or interacting, right? Some of those things have gotten much better, but you still have an accuracy that you have to take into account, right? And so if you were to say, well, perhaps you want to use this for a chat system that you have with your customers, right? And so a request comes in, and then your system has to say, well, do I recognize and understand what's being said enough to recommend the right kind of answer? And so in that case, you'd say, well, accuracy here reflects that you understand what is being asked and you're able to give a good answer. And so under those circumstances, you might say, well, if that customer service is for something that is sort of like broadly used, but not super mission critical, right? So maybe it's returning an item to a store. That actually is something where you could tolerate a little bit of error. And so you're willing to say, well, if a system is 80% accurate and sometimes it has to repeat itself, that's okay. Whereas if you are, doing customer service, but you're doing it in a very, very high intense situation where like giving the wrong advice could ruin a very expensive machine or something like that, or put someone's life in jeopardy. Under those circumstances, you want a very high level of accuracy, and that high level of accuracy means that the systems could be much more expensive.
So do you think this economic viability regarding AI that exists currently will also continue in future?
So what we expect to see is that we have this initial push. So already in our data, we can see that about a quarter of these tasks that AI could potentially do are already economically attractive. And so initially, we should see a bunch of tasks starting to be automated, particularly by big companies or companies where there's a lot of value in doing that automation. And then what we expect is sort of a gradual rollout as these systems get cheaper, as people build platforms so that you can use the same technology not in one firm, but across many firms. All of those things will promote the ability of these systems to be used across more things, and therefore will increase the amount of automation we see from AI.
Neil, you have mentioned in your research paper about the emergence of AI as service platforms and that there will be new business models around AI services. Do you see something as such happening any sooner, given the economic considerations that we are talking about?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last sentence of your question?
Sure. I'll repeat the whole question. You have mentioned in your research paper about the emergence of AI as service platforms and that there will be new business models around AI services. Do you see something as such happening any sooner, given the economic considerations that we are talking about?
So we definitely see the emergence of AI as a service platforms happening very quickly, right? And so let me give you a very concrete example, which was one of the case studies that we had done as part of the preparation for this work. So one of the companies we talked to was very interested in building a system to help small jewelry stores. So small jewelry stores have this challenge, which is that people come in and they say, they might have some idea in their mind and they say, well, I think I want this particular kind of necklace or a particular kind of earrings. But they want to get inspired and say, well, I want this and not this. I want this pattern and not that pattern. And so typically what jewelry stores will do is they will give them some catalogs and say, well, look through this and say, is this the kind of thing you want or is this not the kind of thing you want? The problem is that giving people catalogs like that is a very inefficient way for them to search, right? They may not find the thing that they actually are interested in. And so the company that we interviewed, one of the things that they were very interested in was trying to create a system that could categorize these kind of images of other things such that you could have an interactive process with these small jewelry stores. So you would say, well, I'm interested in earrings, and then it would narrow to earrings. And then you'd say, well, I'm interested in ones that have that are made of gold, and then they've narrowed to the ones made of gold, and ones that are smaller or larger or whatever. And you could continue doing that in the way that we're sort of very used to now doing with the internet. But those are cases where an individual jewelry store just would not have the incentive to create these things on their own. And so this was a company that was trying to create a single system and then sell those to lots of the different jewelry stores. And so that's the kind of thing that we think is already emerging. We think it will continue to emerge. I think we think it'll be quite an important part of the spread of AI through society. But of course, the problem is that in terms of let me not say problem, let me say the sort of speed will be gated by the fact that as these systems develop, it takes a while to sell them, right? So it's one thing if you're building a system for your own company where you can say, okay, well, now everyone is going to use this. It's quite another when you say, well, we've built this system, now you have to go to each of those jewelry stores and sell them the system. That slows down the adoption. And so we should see these platforms emerging quite quickly, but then it will take time for them to spread through the economy and get the benefits and costs of that automation coming from all the places they're selling to.
Another question that I'd like to ask is regarding the startups in AI. So, with the thriving AI startup culture lately, we have been noticing a jump in the recruitment of human labor, mostly in the research segment, in the R&D segment of AI. So, what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense that we're seeing that. And I think the real reason is that if you think about building these systems, you have often a very large AI system that is the basis. These are sometimes called foundation models, and these might be a model built by Google or OpenAI or somebody like that. And they create an initial model, but then it takes often some work to adapt it to the particular circumstance that people care about. And so I think we're often going to have to go to get expert labor in order to do that. And of course, because we are at that initial moment where about a quarter of these tasks are now economically feasible to do because of the technological advances we've had, we definitely do expect there to be a lot of competition for that human labor to actually do these things initially, and that expertise will sort of be used to build these initial systems as they start to get spread through the economy.
Neil, we have been seeing Google and other tech giants laying off large numbers of employees and mostly to replace human resources with generative AI. What skills do you think the employees who are not being laid off inherit? Is it in some way related to qualitative performance?
So I guess I don't know exactly why the tech companies are laying off the people that they have been, right? Certainly one of the impressions I get is that it's more of a change of focus, that they're moving people towards doing more AI stuff, as an example. So I think that part of what we're seeing is just that shift. But indeed, I think an important aspect that is going on here is that as these tools get better, the humans doing jobs also get better themselves, right? And so there's always this tension, right? And I think this is very much what I suspect you're getting at here is, imagine you have 3 people doing a job, and you say, well, I gave them much better tools. You say, well, maybe I can do the same amount of work with 2 people instead of 3 people. And so that would be a reason that you might get some job loss in the kind of way you're talking about. And indeed, that's a big part of the thing we were interested in is this sort of the prospect of job loss. But in the case that you're talking about where the tools get better, there's also another case which is important to think about, which is the case where it's true that you could do the same amount of work with 2 people instead of 3, but you could also for 3 people's worth of work, you could actually do a lot more work. And so another way of saying that is like the price that you could sell this for has gone down because you can do more of it more cheaply. And so that's something where we might say, well, actually demand for that kind of thing goes up. And so if we think very concretely about this in terms of, for example, programming skills, one of the things we expect is that systems like Copilot and ChatGPT can augment what we can do as coders, right? And that's going to make coders more efficient. make them more productive. And so that I think in some areas that means that you'll see an expansion. We'll get more code written because of these things. And in other cases, we'll have people say, well, I only need this amount of code. I can do it with fewer people. And so we'll see both job increases and job decreases at the same time.
One question that I've been stressing on lately in all of my interviews is if AI as a substitute to human will also reduce wages among employees. So, what's your view on that?
So I think that whether AI decreases the wages of someone or not will depend on a lot of factors, which end up being a little complicated. And here's what I mean by that. So for some people, it clearly is going to be a situation where they were doing something, that task gets automated, and maybe they just don't have a lot of other skills. And so that means that they're sort of taken from a job where they had some expertise into an area where they don't have expertise. And therefore their wages are likely to go down. And I think that is unfortunately something that we will see a lot of. And some of the things that these AI systems can do are stuff that humans traditionally had built some expertise on. So there are definitely going to be some people that lose out as a consequence of it. But for other people, it might automate some of what they were doing that was not actually the specialty of what they were focusing on, right? And so you might say, well, it's actually, taken away some of the parts of my job that were not the things that I was really paid for, but I still had to do, and it let me focus on the things that are more valuable. And so in those cases, you'd expect it to raise wages because it's made people more productive. And so I think, again, we're going to see both of these things happening at the same time. And so one of the key questions that I think is important for workers to be thinking about is, well, is the kind of job that I'm in one where the thing that where I have my expertise, that's one of the things that's going to get replaced. And indeed, those are the workers where I think they should be most worried about losing some of the benefit that they've gotten, and therefore some of the wages that they've gotten from having that expertise.